Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. Now, I know that I use the word terrifying with encounters a lot. Well, because the majority of the encounters that I do, I feel are terrifying. But then when I come across encounters that just, I don't know, can't even be described as terrifying, that are just kind of like one up, or maybe even two up. So tonight, those are going to be the encounters that I share with you. Before we get into these encounters, though, a couple links. As you know, I rely on my Patreon, my PayPal, and my merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Those links are in the description below. Also, Dogman, Frightening Encounters, Volume 1, 2, and 3. The audiobook versions are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes. They were written by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny. The links to those books are in the description as well. Now, I know I've taken enough of your time. Let's get on with today's uber terrifying encounters. Shall we? I cannot believe I said Uber. Today's first encounter. My son and I arrived at a horse corral in Groundhog Meadow late on a Friday night in early September of 1978. We spent all Saturday building 2 deer blind with the intent on coming back to the area to hunt later the year. The area at the time didn't receive much recreational activity, and we saw no one else there while we were camping. Saturday night, 3 strange incidents occurred. First, early in the evening, my son and I heard 2 screams. The first scream was located near the horse corral. The second sounded like it was from something very large. It was very loud and low-pitched, sort of like a very angry, large man. I've heard mountain lions in the past, since I've hunted all my life, and this was nothing like that. A few moments later, we heard another scream, but just like the first, and it was coming from the east. We both acknowledged that we heard the screams, but neither of us knew what it was. My son checked on the horse corral and didn't see anything. Later that evening, we're sitting around the campfire, and I notice a pair of red eyes looking at me from near the horse corral. The area where the eyes were was in total darkness, and I don't know if firelight could have reached that far in order to cause eyes to reflect red. At first, I just thought it was a deer or another animal, but then it dawned on me that the eyes were at least 6 to 7 feet off the ground. Since I knew the area pretty well, I knew there were no trees or other objects in the area for something like an owl to stand on. After it watched me for about 30 minutes, I asked my son if he could see it. He did. He and I continued to be watched for another 30 minutes, an hour total. After I briefly looked away and turned back, the eyes were gone. The next morning, both my son and I checked the area and confirmed no trees or other objects were present for an animal to stand on and appear to be 7 feet tall. The last incident happened the same night when we were at the camper, eating dinner and getting ready for bed. The camper was on the bed of my utility truck and was at least 5 feet off the ground. As we were making sandwiches, we both heard and felt a loud bang or thud on the side of the camper. On the front driver's side of the camper was hit so hard it shook the whole truck. We grabbed the flashlights and immediately went outside, expecting to see either a tree limb or a very dazed deer. We saw nothing. We even circled the camper and still didn't see anything. We both then realized that whatever had hit the camper had to be very large and could not have been a deer running blindly in the dark. We thought that all the incidents were strange, but nothing else happened that night, and we went home the next day. We returned to the area to hunt later on that year. Today's second encounter. About 20 years ago, I had heard about a lady who had found rocks on her deck in the form of a circle, where there were no other rocks. I even saw the photos. She lived in a forest, so she thought it was Bigfoot that had placed them there. Okay, about 5 years ago, I'm living near the river in a nice fourplex. We never had any problems with anyone bothering us in the many years that we lived there. It was a very peaceful neighborhood. Nobody bothered our cars or left trash on the property. Nobody bothered the flowers and pots we had placed outside. I had heard that Bigfoot can render themselves invisible at will, and I had also heard that there are invisible creatures that may be in our midst at any time, and we could never tell that they were there. I did a meditation exercise one night. I sent a mental image to Bigfoot. In my mind, I said, "Bigfoot, I send love and light to you. If you do roam around us invisibly, can you please leave me a sign?" That night, I kept my window open because it was pretty warm. It was high enough that I could always hear if someone was trying to get in. My neighbor across the way would always leave her light on outside, and it would shine on my blinds so I could see if anyone had walked by the window. I was awakened at 3 a.m, and I saw a huge shadow walk by my blinds. I was too scared to look out and couldn't hear anything coming from outside. In the morning, my neighbor across the way asked, "Someone came in my backyard and took the little glass plates that I had back there. Did you see or hear anyone else last night?" And I said, "No, I didn't, but I walked past my unit where the large plastic garbage bins were, and sitting on a little plastic table we had out there were 4 little glass plates arranged in a circle, just like the rocks that lady had in my story." I was totally shocked. Never before had I seen anything like this happen in all the years I had lived there, or in the years that I had lived there after that. And this lady was a very sweet lady. I got the plates and returned them to my neighbor, and told her I had no idea who had put the glass plates there and like that in a circle. I wasn't about to tell her I thought Bigfoot put them there. In the future, I sure have to be careful to whom I direct my thoughts. What do you guys think? Please tell me. Today's third encounter. About a year ago, I met a really interesting guy who eventually became a good friend of mine. I'll call him Chris to keep his identity safe. We both had military backgrounds, so naturally we spoke about some of our exploits in those past lives. He had an unexpectedly haunting story to tell. So, here we go. This took place on an undisclosed military base located in damp jungles of a remote island. Chris says he remembers the wilderness being unnervingly quiet for the start of the week leading up to the incident. The personnel stationed there chalked the silence up to a change in seasons or something. There had been reports of a bizarre sighting, fast-moving animal no one could explain. Today's third encounter. About a year ago, I met a really interesting guy who eventually became a good friend of mine. I'll call him Chris to protect his identity. We both had military backgrounds, so naturally we spoke about some of our exploits in those past lives. He had an unexpectedly horrifying story to tell. Here goes. This took place on an undisclosed military base located in the damp jungles of a remote island. Chris says he remembers the wilderness being unnervingly quiet for at least a week leading up to the incident. The personnel stationed there chalked the silence up to a change in seasons or something. There had been reports of bizarre sightings, fast-moving animals no one could explain. Anyone who mentioned them were typically shot down with ridicule from fellow soldiers. The sightings were notably inconsistent with one another. Some saw large eyes, others saw small ones, some heard a big thing trudging boisterously through the woods. Others heard the sound of something small and light sneaking around in the brush. No one had seen anything worth defending in an inevitable argument, let alone losing their reputation over. Chris had heard every report due to the fact that he was the desk sergeant at the time. Anyone who saw or heard something off, which potentially could impact the security of the base, would typically come to him to have it notated in the log. He never took the more fantastical reports seriously enough to actually write them down, unbeknownst to the concerned soldiers who came to him. Some of them came just to talk about what happened, off the record, anyway, which would typically end up with them just trading ghost stories. On the night in question, Chris and his team were on the far side of the island, an area which was completely uninhabited, where no human presence could be found for hundreds of miles in every direction. For that reason, the military chose that location for storing their weapons and explosives. Chris and the partner, who we'll call Barry, for conducting the nightly checks on magazine storage, which lies several miles deep in an uninhabited zone. The jungle was still weirdly quiet, but it was good for them, being that their mission was to detect foreign intelligence or operatives tampering with U.S. equipment or the occasional refugee group that washed ashore. They were on a road that rested in the valley of two mountains, bordered by gigantic hills, thick and rocky, with tall grass as they drove along slowly. With the Humvee windows down, they heard a heavy thud coming from the woods. Totally unexpected, unnatural sound emanating clearly from the tangled growth. The first thud drew their attention, but was quickly followed by other noises. Barry shut off the headlights and shut off the engine so they could sneak up on whoever was out there. They knew anyone attempting to navigate the dense vegetation would have to do so carefully, taking time to avoid injury. But surprisingly, they could hear fast-paced walking rustling through the tall grass. After a few moments, the sound began to move parallel to the road. They restarted their vehicle and started to pursue the noise. The walking continued for a while as they followed it, with only their running lights on, before suddenly stopping. They at first thought they had lost track of whatever it was, so they turned the headlights back on, assuming it was a deer or something, and continued a distance down the road. As Barry proceeded to turn the high beams on, both men noticed something in the distance, approximately 30 yards ahead, a humanoid creature jumping in the road and then into the brush on the other side. It was gray, over 2 meters tall, with a small oval head. Its movements were too swift for its size. The best way they could describe its leaping motion was like that of an impossible nimble frog. Seeing the creature instantly gave Chris the feeling of being punched in the stomach. His heart sank so rapidly, and his adrenaline kicked in so fast that he began to feel nauseous, on the verge of vomiting. He laments that the fact that neither of them had the will to chase after the creature, but that the feeling of being at such a disadvantage was absolutely petrifying. The idea that they were stalking it raised a question. Were they hunting or being hunted themselves? Whatever it was, the monster definitely had a tactical advantage of position and mobility. Chris and Barry turned their truck around and sped off into the night. The woods remained silent for at least another week, returning to the normal droning sounds of local wildlife. Today's fourth part of the upload. Every year, mysterious incidences occurred in Pennsylvania. 2017 was a very active year for strange phenomena of various kinds. Observations of mysterious objects in the sky were reported in the daylight as well as nighttime. People reported very close-range encounters with many UFOs. There were numerous reports of strange creatures being seen as well, from sightings of Bigfoot to giant birds with huge wingspans. The large panthers, many people encountered creatures they couldn't explain. There were various other oddities reported, such as strange howls, odd footprints, mysterious booms. This year will mark 59 years of Stan Gordon's research into UFO phenomenon and other strange encounters that continue to be reported yearly across the Keystone State. Stan established a hotline for the public to report UFO sightings in 1969, and he continued to receive such calls on a regular basis along with emails. In 1970, Stan founded and directed the first of 3 volunteer research groups that investigated these incidents across the state. For many years, Stan was joined in the field by scientists, engineers, and a variety of research specialists that took a serious look into numerous unusual cases. When Stan began in field investigations in '65, it became apparent to many UFO sightings and, in fact, various other oddities reported could be satisfactorily explained with proper investigation. Many UFO sightings were misidentifications, such as bright stars and planets, lights on an aircraft, bright meteors, and weather-related events. In more recent years, Chinese lanterns, the International Space Station, and drones have created such reports. Some Bigfoot sightings were determined to be large shaggy dogs, bear, and hunters in ghillie suits. The following is a synopsis of some of the more interesting reports that came to Stan Gordon's attention during 2017. For many years, residents along the Chestnut Ridge area of Westmoreland County, who were familiar with sounds of the local wildlife, have been reporting loud howls and screams that they couldn't identify. In January, very long, high-pitched siren-like scream were again reported 2 days later from the other end of the state in Schuylkill County. Very similar sounds were also heard. The witness involved as a wildlife biologist who heard the sounds on 3 different occasions within 2 days and tried to record the vocalization. The scientist, who was trained to identify animal sounds, was unable to do so. In early February, in a rural area near Latrobe, witnesses driving through the area during an early morning hours watched a strange animal run in front of them across the road into a field. The animal was described as dark brown, 4-legged, stood about 4 feet, was thin and graceful, and had a long, pointy snout with no tail. Also during February, 3 daylight sightings of a spherical object were reported within a week from widespread locations. In Forest City, a silent black object hovered low in the sky, while a number of small round objects maneuvered near it. Some of the spheres appeared solid, while others were transparent. The larger object and spheres accelerated into the sky and were lost from sight. A few days later, a resident near Kittanning in Armstrong County was observing what appeared to be a military aircraft with a contrail. As the witness watched the jet move across the sky into the distance, he noticed what appeared to be a solid silver sphere hovering higher in the sky near where he had first spotted the jet. As the witness watched, the silver sphere streaked across the sky toward the northeast and was gone in seconds. 4 days later, another observer near Suttersville in Westmoreland County watched an aircraft enter a cloud and exit it that afternoon as it continued on its journey. Suddenly the man saw a bright silver sphere appear in the sky at a low altitude. The sphere followed slowly along the path toward the cloud that it had entered. The witness watched for several minutes, but the object never exited the cloud. During the year, there were observations of formations of light, as well as triangular and rectangular objects. In April, a wooded area of Luzerne County, a witness was riding a bike that afternoon when she noticed movement along the tree line. She thought it was a bear, and with cubs, but was startled when it stood up and it looked to be 7 to 8 feet tall gorilla with long hair. The creature had very long arms, and placed in its hand on its face as it took long strides and walked off into the woods. The witness had the impression the creature may have been injured. Bigfoot sightings were reported yearly in Pennsylvania. Additional Bigfoot sightings were reported from various locations in 2017, including Westmoreland, Fayette, Butler, Cambria counties. Late in April of 2017, a witness in a rural area of Crawford County, Pennsylvania, observed a strange animal near her pond. The animal had a furry body that looked as black could be at the distance, and the animal appeared to have a body about 3 feet long, and the tail length was about the same. The tail hung straight back and curved up at the end. The witness felt like she had saw a panther. There were many other reports for years what people had described as black panthers being reported in that area of the state. In May, at a location near Chestnut Ridge, not far from Langori, a couple reported seeing some strange, huge, dark birds unlike they had seen before. In one instance, the group of huge flying creatures landed in their backyard. They were familiar with local birds, and they thought what they were looking at were similar to condors. They estimated that some of these creatures stood between 4 to 6 feet tall with a wingspan from 10 to 12 feet wide. They were able to obtain a few pictures that shows one of the creatures with a large head, the neck extended straight up. There has been a long history of sightings of huge birds in Pennsylvania and elsewhere that are commonly referred to as thunderbirds. Numerous sightings have been reported over the years around this same area. Today's last part of the upload. One of the more bizarre creatures sighting during the war in the Pacific also occurred in the Southern Islands, this time specifically on Okinawa Island. In this case, troops reported seeing strange humanoid beings in the sky. Often near military installations, these flying humanoids were mostly sighted around the time of the bloody Battle of Okinawa in 1945. These beings were described as having large, leathery wings like a bat, yet seeming to be mostly human in other respects. The flying humanoids were mostly solitary, although there was at least one occasion when more than one was spotted together. Whatever the creatures were, they were mostly being reported as silent and shy, keeping their distance and never really coming close enough for people to see detail. Despite this, it was often reported that an eyewitness had an unnerving feeling that they were somehow observing by an enigmatic creature. The sighting of these flying humanoids have an eerie similarity to the more modern-day sighting from military installations in Japan in 1952 at Camp Okobo near Kyoto, Japan, a Private Sinclair Taylor reported seeing something strange in the sky. The being was about 7 foot tall with a similar wingspan. The panicked guard began firing his weapon toward it, but when he looked at the spot where the being had been hovering, it had vanished. Taylor had originally thought the creature to be a giant bird at first. It was not until it drew closer that he realized it had a humanoid body. The creature had been flapping its large wingspan. The sound of its flapping was what first alerted Taylor to the creature's presence. But upon coming closer, the thing began to hover instead. The being was described to be around 7 feet tall, and with a similar wingspan. Depending on the report you read, there is also mention of glowing eyes. However, it is difficult to say if it was in Taylor's original report or embellishment added later. The creature hovered before the terrified Taylor, who began firing his weapon at it in a frenzied panic. When he looked back to where the creature had been, it was gone, leaving behind no apparent blood or any other physical evidence. Taylor was also not the only witness to whatever this thing was. When he reported to his sergeant, it was revealed that a guard had seen what was apparently the same thing a year before, although Taylor did not know of this other sighting and had no contact with the other eyewitness. The description of the creature was remarkably similar. It's unclear whether this sighting has anything to do with World War II sightings in Okinawa, but they seem similar enough to warrant mention. It is unfortunate that we may never have answers to these fascinating wartime cryptid accounts. At the time, there was rarely any attempt to collect evidence or launch a proper investigation into these bizarre occurrences. In most cases, such reports were considered merely anomalies or distractions from the wartime duty. In addition, few scientists would have been willing to go back and venture into these war zones to investigate such reports, even if they were so inclined. As such, World War II cryptid accounts such as these may forever be lost in time. Alright guys, I told you I had some strange and very weird encounters to share with you. Let's do a little breakdown quickly. Now, I'm often just kind of, when I either read aloud or read silently encounters, I then go and start thinking about historic events around the times that these were happening. And oddly, strangely enough, prior to the bridge collapse in Point Pleasant, the Mothman was spotted. Some say that prior to Chernobyl disaster, there was some sort of humanoid with a wingspan flying around the area. And during the bloody Battle of Okinawa, which was a couple of months prior to us dropping bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, I wonder if the creature that was talked about in the last upload was kind of a warning or some sort of just oh great, my mind just went completely blank. Don't you love that when that happens? Well, you know what I'm trying to say. Some sort of omen. Bam, there we go. So I'm curious. I'm wondering if that was an omen, because it really didn't attack anybody, but yet in 52 spotted again, which is very, very interesting, because nothing really happened in 1952 other than our occupation of Japan. So yeah, I'm just thinking possibly an omen or whatever. But very interesting, all in the same sense. And yeah, it is a shame because, like World War I, World War II, there were all these word of mouth reports from troops in the trenches. And a large part of me wants to believe them, but a large part of me really, really thinks that, they may be creepypastas, because a lot of the majority, if not all, people who served in World War I were dead. Of course, there's not too many survivors of World War II left either. So, but supposedly there was some sort of hellhound in the trenches in the area marked Hell Zone or whatever. But I can really respect that because, even if it's not a creepypasta with, so many people saying, yes, it's true, I give it a definite true, I guess. I don't know. I just wish there was just more kind of written reports back then. It's a shame. And who knows, maybe someday in the near future some guy's cleaning out his great-granddad's or his granddad's estate and finds this friggin' amazing journal from the trenches, or some war-torn time, and they can talk about these dog-like creatures spotted in these areas. That'd be friggin' sick, man. I'd love that. And I know you guys would too. So let's keep our fingers crossed. Interestingly enough, with the fourth part of the upload, Pennsylvania. Now, a lot of the East Coast is just riddled with so many unexplainables. We've got Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, Vermont. Vermont's got the crazy Bennington Triangle. And ironically enough, around that area, there's been Dogman sightings at the Bennington War Memorial on a mountain, which is 45 to 50 minutes away from my house. And I've been there, and it's a freaking creepy place, man. It is really creepy. I don't know if it's like the magnetic zone of the triangle or whatever that makes it so creepy, but when you're there, you're just like, wow. And I remember one time I went there with a friend. We'd been shopping when I was younger out in Manchester, and we were just going for a drive, being teenage boys, and really had his mom's car, and we couldn't partake in a little bit of smoking partay in the mom's car, so we kind of pulled over into the Bennington area and got out. And I remember just when we got out of the car and we kind of walked across this field, and I just got this very strange feeling of kind of being watched, but almost like we weren't wanted either. And for some reason, I'm not really sure how to explain it, but it was almost like we weren't even wanted in that area of land, possibly by the land or by whatever was watching us, or who knows. But anyway, back to Pennsylvania. Yeah, Pennsylvania is a creepy state for encounters. Possibly because there's vortexes. And these things just drop out, I really think that where these encounters are getting so, prevalent, that there are vortexes everywhere. And maybe that's something people should look into, because, and not with just your buddy Bill from the back end of the garage, or, you know, this and that guy from this group, and with some scientists, you know. I mean, there's nothing wrong with Joe Norm going out into the woods, but, you know, a scientist or you know, some biologist going with, you know, is truly what really needs to happen, and more. So, because, you know, I'm not saying that, let's say this guy goes out and he's in the woods and boom, he sees Dogman ripping the spinal cord out of a Bigfoot. Oh man, that would be such a cool story. Can you imagine if somebody saw that story? Wow. Anyway, I just got myself super excited. So, you know, Joe Norm sees this. Joe Norm comes, tells the Dogman community, tells Bigfoot community, and, you know, he's going to get dumped on. But if there was a biologist or a scientist with him, or, you know, I think that kind of gives it validation. And I think that's what these groups that go looking for Dogman and Bigfoot, and, you know, they really need. You know, it can't be just a bunch of beer drinking Joe Norms going out. Yeah, I mean, that's great. It is great. But the validation really needs to have people of science behind it to, you know, kind of, not for us, but for the doubters, the naysayers, to really take it into consideration that these things exist. So, third encounter was creepy as ever. And I think that Chris and Barry were right on their assumptions that they were almost being led into a trap. Like there was something bad was going to happen at the end of that freaking trail. And very smart and great, good going for, you know, acting on instinct and turning around, because you get that gut feeling. Why proceed? You know, I mean, is it worth it? No, it's definitely not. Definitely not. Would it be amazing to have photos? Definitely, but nothing is worth your life, man. Nothing. But yeah, that's, I mean, you got some military guys on a military base, on a jungle, uninhabited, and you've got this creature that's friggin' lurking in the woods and pretty much running a setup on these two boys. And I say boys because, you know, I'm assuming they were in their 18 to 20 age, and I'm 43, so I'm old. But wow, I'm so glad they acted on instinct so they could have this story to share with us, because it was friggin' creepy, man. Very creepy. Now, the second encounter reminds me of a subscriber's story who reached out to me, and I have not yet shared her encounter because she has not given me permission to yet. But she was getting hit by infrasound when they moved in. This is just briefly, you know, what I know I can talk about, and there's pictures along with stuff, and so hopefully very soon she'll allow me to share this and possibly come on and share it in her own words. But anyway, I'm going to leave the state undisclosed, and she goes out in her backyard violently ill from this infrasound, and kind of like meditates with this Native American drum music going on behind her. And this walking wolf thing came up and was coming out of these like portals and stuff. She'd be able to take pictures. But she ended up meditating and communicating with what she believes is Bigfoot. And she feels that was putting that infrasound out and making her very violently ill. So she reached out, meditated, and kind of said, hey, I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to live with my family, yada, yada, yada. And she got a response mentally. Now, we're not talking schizophrenically. We're talking, mentally something communicated with her. And, it just said something about, you destroyed my home, which, crazy enough, where this thing is talking about, there was a couple acreages behind her yard, and it was clear cut for like some probably housing development like they're doing now every day and everywhere. And it said, you stole my property and destroyed my property. And she said, no, this is my property line. And 3 days later, she was not getting the infrasound sickness anymore, which is crazy. So yes, I do believe the second encounter. I do believe truly 100% people, if they have the time, the patience, the presence, and the belief, I think they can communicate with these things. Do I recommend going in the woods and sitting in the middle of the woods and saying, hey, Bigfoot, Dogman, come let me scratch you behind the ears? No. But if there's a possibility of communicating and getting knowledge or, whatever, I think that's beneficial. Last part of the upload, geez, some crow, that is terrifying. And it's coming from California. And 3 friggin' incidences in one night. Same piece of land, same 2 guys, son and dad. Yeah. And these are the encounters that people hear that are campers and hikers, and they get petrified and don't want to go camping anymore. But if it's your time to see one of these things or whatever, you're not going to be able to change it. So you just go and enjoy nature and chill out and positive vibes, whatever. But yeah, I just think that as of right now, because we don't understand, I think what really needs to happen is living in harmony with the cryptids. So, I don't know. I'm not making any sense. It probably sounds stupid. Living in harmony with the cryptids. But I really think we could, through channeling and stuff like that, if they are. Because why the hell else would they be the majority, not majority, but at least 60% of people that have had encounters are empath. I'm not. Maybe one of the people in the car that was with us that night is. Who knows? But, there's got to be a friggin' reason to it, And it's just been going on for hundreds of years. Bigfoot, Dogman, terror, scourge in the woods. Anyway, have a good night, guys. Thanks for always listening.